I'm going to be doing a quick video on building modular kits. I'm not going to bother actually talking about how to build the stuff, but instead I'll be focusing on tips on how to improve usability. I'm sure you all know about how every artist has a favorite rock, prop, or decal, but it's usually not because it's the most bestest looking rock ever existed, but it's usually simply because it's useful, and you can use that same rock to build whatever you want. So that should be the same focus when building kits, building something usable that everyone will enjoy using and will keep using over and over again. So the first step is always recognizing the importance of usability. So rather than focusing on what asset you're going to build, focus on what is the space that I need to fill. So starting with the basics, most people will place kits by simply moving, copying, and then replacing assets. So making sure the pivot is consistent between all of the pieces will save a lot of time. On this note, it's also worth talking about rotations, because a lot of assets do need to continue snapping when rotated. And as you can see in this example, if you don't use the right amount of sides on your cylinder, you'll end up with all these weird little jaggedy overhangs. So it's pretty easy to avoid this, and it's simply by building things by a multiple of 4. So 12, 8, 16, 32, etc. And then you always have this 90-degree perfect snapping where things always line up. So now for the biggest tip. As I kind of mentioned earlier, the most important thing is looking at the space you need to fill rather than what you want to put there. So in this case, I'm just modeling with some block out cupboards. And as you can see, if I just rotate it and make a 45-degree unit, it throws everything off the grid because the metrics have not been considered. Whereas if I position 2 pieces as a proxy on either side, I can then snap to those pieces, and I know that no matter what I do, it will still perfectly snap to the grid. Building on this, even when things are built to a useful metric size, you may still find that it offsets everything weirdly. For instance, in this pipe, if I have a 1 meter pipe section, but then the corner is only 15 centimeters, suddenly everything is 1 meter 15 centimeter. So if you're trying to fill a 4x4 room, you end up with this kind of weird limbo where nothing adds up. One of the things to remember here is that the accuracy of your lengths is basically a multiplier of your smallest piece. So if you have a 10 centimeter piece, you can achieve anything that is a multiplier of 10 centimeters. Obviously, that may be not efficient if you had 110 centimeter pieces, but you could have 3 1 meters and then a couple 10 centimeters here and there. So trying to give a bit of flexibility in the consideration of your pieces. With this in mind, it's a pretty good idea to consider the actor count. So for kits, particularly stuff like pipes and vents, things that are highly repeating, these small pieces give you a lot of accuracy. But if you try and cover a lot of distance, it quickly ramps up the actor count. So in these cases, it's always worth adding some larger pieces in order to cover those longer distances. So moving away from lengths and moving on to angles. When building corners, there are 2 ways of keeping corner pieces to snap. The first is to make use of local transforms. So for instance, if I move my piece down 25 centimeters, rotate it 45 degrees, and then move it another 25 centimeters locally, I can easily recreate that in the engine. So I know that at the end it will still snap. The other option, kind of like how I mentioned earlier, is to position your 2 proxies and then just construct a piece that bridges the gap. So now that we've got all of our core pieces made, time to talk about the most useful accessory you can make, and that is a sleeve. So you've probably had the case where your pieces, you're budging up against the wall, but you end up with like a 3 centimeter gap or something. So instead of having to scale things kind of jankily, it's good to consider this. So build a piece that you can slide over the other pieces. So in this case, I would just build like a bracket or a buckle, and then I would just clip these 2 ends in, and it would just cover the hole. building on this, you can also use it to create more flexible pieces. For instance, like building a T-junction that is a sleeve rather than part of the core piece, and you can slide it up and down your pipe and have it basically fit anywhere. It's also really useful for creating stuff like wall brackets, because generally you end up clipping your pipe quite far into the wall, because every room is a different size. So having something that you can slide up and down makes it very, very flexible and usable. Now, this one isn't really a tip, but more of a reminder how important it is to test your work. So I always build a block out for my kits and then play around in an engine and see if everything fits together. A bit like how I've been doing here. Because if you have to update things later, it's going to move everything. So if you have a load of people already made their levels and then you update the pivots, everybody's going to cry. And they'll all be very, very sad and have to redo their work. So testing it, making it right from the start, saves a lot of time down the line. So yeah, nothing really crazy, just a few fundamentals that hopefully you find useful. Hopefully this wasn't too long. My biggest challenge when making tutorials is how slowly I talk. So yeah, hopefully you find this useful, and maybe I'll see you again soon.